We had left off in the Ramchal that when we speak about God's unity, there is no way to understand who God is, as we said, because he's unlimited. So are we able to come upon the reality that there's no one like him? Because there's nothing comparable to him. His wisdom, his understanding, his doing, whatever may happen, whatever exists, there's nothing which is the comparable of him in terms of its divine genius, that there's nothing comparable to him. And this is the concept of Ein Od Milvado. Nothing exists outside of himself. But the Ramchal explains it's not so simple. Although in terms of our perception, there's no one outside of him, but maybe there are multiple powers. But how do we know he's the only one? We look at the world. You see the sun, you see the moon. Maybe there's a power behind the moon. Maybe there's a power behind the sun. Who says all these things are manifestations of God continuously willing they should function as they function? Because he's going to present in a moment, there are multiple levels or background why people were idolaters. We're going to discuss in a moment. One position is God is a creator. Now, God being the creator, is he interested in being involved in all the details and the nuances of the function of creation? What we call the nitty-gritty. He creates. After he creates, he gives it over to powers which he created. They should maintain his creation, but he's not involved. Not that he's not aware, but he's not involved. He has no input. He leaves it all up to his deities. It's like, the president has generals. He puts generals and gives them all various cabinet members, puts them in place that they should oversee certain functions of the monarchy or of the country. But the king is out doing his thing. Lahavdil, God created. Everything exists because he created it to function as it does. But who maintains the creation? The deities. And that's the basis of idolatry. You worship the sun, you worship the moon, you worship the god of wheat, spelt, or whatever it is, or fertility. That's what it is. How do we know that's not the reality? Avram Avinu, we had said, he looked at existence. Who is the master of the universe? But maybe there's more than one master. And even if there is one master, maybe the one who actually oversees existence is now multiple powers, which you call deities. And that's the basis for idolatry. That's the question. How do we come to this conclusion and this understanding that all the various positions of idolatry are incorrect? We see things where there's no rhyme or reason. The whole concept of tzaddik v'tovlo, Russia v'tovlo. The tzaddik has it good, the Russia has it good. The tzaddik has it bad, the Russia has it bad. So what's the basis for how whoever oversees this existence deals with the righteous and the evil? If the evil and the righteous are treated the same, whether in the negative or in the positive. That's what he's coming to explain. So the intellect says, although we recognize there's no one as great as him, but the question is, who's the him? He said, the Pasuk tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu, the verse says, said to the Jews, you saw with absolute clarity, no one exists besides him. So that I had mentioned in the Midrash. At Sinai, with the Jews prophesied in a awake state, God opened the depths of the earth and the heights of heaven and showed them that whatever exists is only due to him. No other power exists other than him. And all the various powers that exist are only manifestations of him willing those powers. And the function is directly connected to the source, which is him. That's what Moshe says to the Jewish people. Ata haris lo das, you were shown with absolute clarity to know, ein od milevado. There's nobody but God. He says, but the question is, how do I know he is the master who controls? Nobody but him, but how do we know he's the controlling master? And how do we know after he created, and he's the master, how do we know nobody could interfere? There's no power that can interfere with him. You have a king. He's in total control. He's the monarch. But there could be an internal rebellion who are able to usurp his authority and do things against him. How do we know that his control is absolute? Exactly as we said, because all the powers that exist only emanate from him. So therefore, there's no such thing as usurping his power. And God says, I am who I am. I take the life, I give the life. These are all verses in the Torah. They're verses in Scripture. Does anyone tell you what to do? So now we speak about his absolute dominion. How do we know that his dominion is absolute? He's the creator. He will things to be. How do we know at this point that he has total control? And that control is absolute. Because everything is a manifestation of his willing, whatever does exist. He says, why do we have to address this so seriously? Because he says the many philosophical positions which are false, he says a number of them is the basis for idolatry. Many of them, it's in the minds of the unlearned, because they really don't have an understanding how the world functions. You know, very often people, you ask every person, what's nature? Things are on automatic pilot. God created a world, he said automatic pilot. It's meant to run a certain program, and that's the way it goes. There's no longer God's intervention in existence. He says the majority of people who are ignorant, that's what they believe. You have people who are sinners, defying Jews. They behave like there is no God. They say the power of my hand brought about all my success. They don't attribute it to God. I mean, we find people, they say, thank God I'm able to succeed without God. That's the way people speak. I mean, it's literally oxymoron. If you're thanking God that I could succeed without your help. But if you believe in what God is, there's no such thing as you could succeed without his help. But why does a person believe that? Because you find people who are much more worthy than him don't succeed, and he does succeed. Evidently, it has nothing to do with worthiness, but it has to do with who you are, what your capabilities are, and who you know. Or just, it's pot luck, as they say. Now he speaks about the various levels, positions of idolatry. The first position is God created the world, but he's above whatever exists. He's not involved in the minutiae of existence. And we find that when Moshe originally came to power, when he presented his credentials, he says, I am representing Yud Kei Vav Kei. Yud Kei Vav Kei represents the infinite. Paro, being an idolater, he goes through his encyclopedia of deities. He says he's not listed. What does it mean he's not listed? Because Paro had such an understanding of what the infinite is, God is not going to be involved and be concerned about our bodily functions, about conception, about all these issues. Not involved. Things that are abominable. It's inappropriate for God to be involved at that level. So he gives it over to his underlings. God removed himself. You know, it's interesting. In the Catholic religion, Christianity, in certain groups, there's such a thing as priests who are celibate. They don't marry. They don't engage, according to their doctrine, in procreation. Why? Because since they represent the cloth and they're the holy people, and that is original sin, they don't go near it. Could you imagine? So if the priest is so holy, he doesn't go near that. God, the creator, who's the holy of holy, he's going to be involved in this process of procreation. So it's a little contradictory, you understand? The ordinary person, he procreates. It's okay for him to be involved in the original sin. But the priest, who represents God, and God is the one who is involved in that process, because can't happen without him, the priest is too holy to be involved in it. The whole thing is totally contradictory in just intelligence. It's unintelligible. God says, I want you to procreate, and it's okay, because otherwise there's no mankind. But the priest, being this holy human being, he has to be celibate. Just the concept. What is the rationale of that? If God allows conception, you got to pray to God that you should be able to conceive. You should be able to do the act which allows conception to take place. But yet, it's too unholy. For the holy, but the holy of holies, L'havdil, that's something he's involved in. Adam had 3 sons. Cain, Abel, and Seth, Shase. Cain kills Abel. So Cain was a bad guy. He's considered a Russia, evil. And God had decreed that after 7 generations, he will be killed, which he was. He deemed him that he should be a wanderer. He cannot stay in one place. His whole life, he was like in a state of exile. His son, Shes, which was born to Adam after 30 years after he was created, was a tzaddik. Noach came from Shase. Shase was the tzaddik. Okay? Cain was the evil one. Who introduced idolatry to existence? The child of Cain, or the child of Shase? You would say Cain being the bad person, being the person who believed he could somehow deceive God and hoodwink God. It would be sensible to say that the one to introduce idolatry to humanity would be the child of Cain. But yet the Torah says explicitly, it was Shes's child who introduced idolatry to existence. How do we understand it? You come from such a holy home. A person's a tzaddik, a person who has such a relation with God, and you should be the one to say it's not God, it's someone else. Cain, who believes he could hoodwink God, so he himself, his child with that background, should introduce, there are other powers other than God, but it's Shase's child, it's Seth's child. Why? Now, what did Chase believe? God's the creator. God is infinite, and there's nothing outside of God. Therefore, every aspect of existence, even the minutia of existence, it only happens to the degree that it happens because God wills that it should happen this way. But after Chase educates his son to give him this understanding of God, the son says to his father, but it doesn't make sense. If that's who God is, he's this infinite power who creates. It doesn't make any sense. He's going to be involved in the minutia of creation, in our bowel movement, in our digestive system, in the waste, human waste. He's involved in that. It's totally unintelligent to say such a thing. You know what it must be? He created the system, then he walked away. He gave it over to his hosts, the powers, the deities, only because his father presented God in such a magnificent, infinite context. Therefore, he says, I can't accept it. If that's the case, how does God have any relevance to this existence? As a result of that, he rejected. He says it must be, he may have created, but the actual overseeing and the function of creation, that was given over to the lesser powers, which are called the hosts of heaven. And these are the deities. So it's only because his father presented in such a magnanimous, broad, unlimited context, therefore he couldn't accept it. Therefore, Pharaoh, when he says, who is Yud-Ke Vav-Ke? Who is this infinite God that I should listen to? He's not listed. When we list powers that control existence, it's the deities. What you're talking about, it's not within the realm of our listing, because he has no relevance to this existence. I'll give you an example. The Talmud discusses the four most beautiful women who ever lived. Sarah, Imenu, Rachel, Rachel, Abigail, the wife of David, and the question, Rochav, the wife of Joshua, whatever it is. The Talmud does not mention Chava, Eve, the wife of Adam. And it's clear she was the most beautiful woman ever lived. So if she's the most beautiful woman ever lived, why shouldn't she list it as one of the most beautiful women who ever lived? So on that, the commentators explain, particularly the commentator on the page known as Tosis explains, who was Chava, who was Eve? She was the creation of God. She was the handiwork of God. Her beauty was not within the realm of human beauty. This was beauty on a divine level. That would be like comparing a human being, an ape, to a human being. It was so out of another realm, a lesser realm, she can't even be within that classification. It was a different dimension of beauty, because that's God's creation. The others were born of birth, the birth of a conception of a human being. So within that realm, that classification of conception, they're the most beautiful women. God creates something, he's the creator, it's the ultimate. You understand? But Rembrandt doesn't teach finger painting. You have to go to his special school of masters to become a master. God being the creator, he doesn't deal or concern himself with the minutia of existence. And that's the basis for idolatry. That's one position. But how do we know that's not right? That's not real. That's not right. It makes sense that God would not be. But yet God says, I'm involved in every aspect of creation. There's nothing in function of existence that he's not involved with. The little minnow that swims in the lake, he wills its existence. The tadpole that turns into a frog, he's involved in that. And every development in existence, he continues to release his energies, which allow these things to manifest themselves. But how do we know that? So if you go back to Sinai, very simple. He showed the Jews factually he is involved. Because everything in existence has to be on that exact level. And it's all to recognize that despite your questions, that you have to accept that's your reality. And there's no such thing as God is not aware. And it's not you're playing one against the other, one power against the other, which is the whole concept of idol worship. You accept one, then you reject the other, because you feel you'll fare better with one rather than the other. That's not the way it works. Others believe that it depends on what star you're born. It's all based on the zodiac. You know, if you're an astrologer and you're able to read the stars pretty accurately, you know what your destiny is, you know what tomorrow will bring, and you know exactly how to navigate the landmines of life. That's the way it is. It depends on which star you're born under. That's what determines. So you worship the stars, this star and that star. You know, it's interesting.